So the objectives with this is going to be to recognize and describe what are the resident rights and how we apply them in all aspects of the resident's care, to protect residents from abuse and neglect, to care for and fulfill the rights of the cognitively impaired residents or residents who are unable to advocate for themselves, and to understand that there are regulatory and facility expectations in regards to resident transfers and discharges from the facility, so we need to understand what those are. I'm not going to read through everything word for word, but Mennonite home resident rights, we believe that every human being is worthy of respect, that human life is precious, and that throughout the various stages of life, every person has the right to be treated with dignity and respect, and supported by a stimulating, learning, healing, and sustaining environment. The resident has a right to dignity, self-determination, person-centered care, and communication with and access to persons and services inside and outside the Mennonite home. One of the ways that we help to ensure that residents are involved in their care and helping to have a say and a voice in the kind of care that we're providing to them, a voice in how their daily routine plays out, and a way that we respect their preferences is involving the residents in their care planning in that process by asking them what their preferences are. There's interviews that are done, and a lot of times the residents do attend the care conferences. They're certainly all invited, but some choose to attend, some don't choose to attend. Family members are involved in that. We also ask that staff too, a lot of times the CNAs are the ones that are in and talking with the resident, working with the resident every day, and you might be the first one to observe that maybe their care plan, something on their bedside care plan, isn't really matching up with how the resident's day plays out. Maybe it's not quite accurate. You think there needs to be some changes, or maybe you notice that there's something on the care plan or something not on the care plan, like maybe they enjoy getting up, they prefer to get up a little bit earlier than what it says on the care plan, or they prefer to have a shower in the evening. They really like chocolate ice cream versus vanilla ice cream. Just little things like that, things that make up a resident's day, things that you might notice that might be helpful. You need to let the charge nurses know so that they can update those care plans. A resident has a right to be supported in exercising his or her rights, and not just as a resident of the Mennonite home, but a citizen of the United States. And they should be able to exercise those rights without any fear of interference, coercion, discrimination, or reprisal in the exercise of those rights, and to be supported by staff in exercising his or her rights. To be treated with respect and dignity, they have a right to designate a representative in accordance with state law, and any legal surrogate so designated may exercise the resident's right to the extent provided by state law. So we do have residents here who are cognitively impaired, who maybe need help with decision making or aren't able to do some things for themselves, whether that be finances or making certain healthcare decisions. So they can designate a family member. Oftentimes it is a family member that we're talking with and working with to make sure that we're doing everything that we need to do to care for that resident in the way that they would want. If a resident is educated and competent, the rights of the resident devolve to and are exercised by the resident representative appointed to act on the resident's behalf. A resident has a right to be fully informed orally and in writing in a language that they can understand of their rights and the regulations and everything having to do with their care and what we're doing for them here. So an example of that is, we do have a couple of residents here who speak German, and German is their primary language. And we did have a resident who, just as an example, the therapist had recommended another diet texture. And, the resident was indicating in their way that they didn't agree with that. They didn't like that altered diet texture. And it was very upsetting to the resident. The family was supportive of the resident. They felt like they should be able to eat whatever they want. So, we were able to come up with a waiver, but how we went over that with the resident was, we also have we have a staff person that speaks that language, that speaks German. The family members spoke German. And so, the agreement was in English, but we had it translated to her in German. And we just went over it and made sure that that the resident did understand it, that it was all presented to her in a way so she could understand the consequences of the decision that she was making. So again, it's the resident being fully informed of everything that we're doing, and be fully informed prior to or at time of admission and during stay of services that are available in the facility, the types of caregivers or professionals that provide those services, Medicaid and Medicare certification status. They have a right to be informed of their total health status, including but not limited to medical status, and to be fully informed in advance of any changes in their plan of care or treatment. They have a right to choose their own physician, request, refuse, or discontinue any medications, treatment, participate or refuse in any experimental research. A resident with an intellectual disability or mental disorder will have state mental health authority or state intellectual disability authority promptly notified after a significant change in their mental or physical condition. And anybody that we would have admitted here that does have that type of a disability, normally there would be, disability services would be involved, and there would be a case manager who would be assisting with that, or, Linn County Mental Health would be involved. They have a right to choose activities, schedules, including waking and sleeping times, healthcare and providers of healthcare services, consistent with their beliefs, interests, assessments, plan of care, and other applicable provisions. To be free from verbal, sexual, mental, and physical abuse, corporal punishment, exploitation, and involuntary seclusion. To be transferred or discharged only in accordance with the division's transfer discharge rules, and we'll be going into what those rules are here in a minute. A resident with a same-sex spouse must be afforded treatment equal to an opposite-sex spouse if the marriage was valid where it occurred. But really, I can say this, anybody that, we've had here, we just treat everybody with respect. We're not going to discriminate or judge somebody based on their relationships or, who their representative is. We don't do that here. They're not to be reassigned to a new room within the facility without cause and without adequate preparation for the move in order to avoid harmful effects. And he or she may refuse if the transfer is purely for the convenience of staff. So we do have several things that we kind of have to consider and go through. Charlene Archer, who works in social services and does admissions here, she also manages all the transfers and room changes here. And so, a reason why we might ask somebody to move within the facility is, if they're on skilled rehab and they end up needing to stay here long term, they would move. The goal would be for them to move off of the rehab unit, maybe down to Dove's Nest or Northern Lights. And that's something that Charlene discusses with the family. They do go over that a little bit. There's some paperwork that they sign. And so it's not just, we don't just decide to move somebody. Another reason might be if, two roommates aren't getting along, if one of them is going to move, they have to be in agreement with that. Another example would be, we have the new building, so residents are going to be moving to the new building. There's a lot of things that we're going to need to be observing when residents move. Has their mood changed? Is their appetite changed? Are they doing okay with the move? There's a lot of things that we're going to be watching for. And then the residents that aren't moving to the new building, they're going to be moving around just because of the construction that's going to be occurring in this building. Residents have a right to voice grievances and suggest changes in policies and services to the grievance official, to be treated with consideration, respect, and dignity, and assured complete privacy during treatment and when receiving personal care, to associate and communicate privately with persons of the resident's choice, to be provided with privacy for visits when requested, which will be very nice when the majority of our residents have private rooms. That'll make it a lot easier. To have clinical and personal records kept confidential, to access personal and medical records pertaining to him or her upon oral or written request by the individual, to purchase photocopies of records pertaining to the resident, to participate in social, religious, and community activities at the discretion of the resident, to keep and use personal clothing and possessions as space permits unless to do so infringes on another resident's rights, to be free of retaliation, not to be required to sign any contract or agreement that purports them waiving any of their rights, the right to formulate advance directives, and they have a right to file a complaint. We do encourage residents to let us know when there's an issue so that we can resolve it. They can also file a complaint with Senior and Disability Services, and we can assist them with that if that's what they need to do or want to do. They can also contact the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, which is a volunteer position with the state in Salem, and then they can assign somebody to come down and talk with the resident or the family. So transfer and discharge rules. We have a lot of people that admit and discharge here, especially down on the rehab unit. A lot of people come here, most people come here just for temporary placement following a hospitalization or a surgery. And those people, we're not required to issue a 30-day notice. They're here for a planned short period of time. We work with them on getting together a plan, and we document that this is the plan, this is what they want, and this is their intention to go home following their skilled rehab stay. After insurance is no longer covering skilled rehab, they do have the option of staying here longer. It's just that they would need to, there is going to be a date where when insurance isn't covering, they'll have to be paying out of pocket. And a lot of people, don't want to do that. They would rather go home or look at another option like assisted living or adult foster care. So we kind of help them with that. So for involuntary, reasons for discharge, which I just kind of generally explained, the physician states in writing that the resident's health has improved. So there's records to show that their health has improved and that the services, they no longer need the services that we provide in our facility, or that, we're no longer able to meet the residents' care needs at the Mennonite home and have identified another environment available which can better meet the residents' needs. So that's kind of when we're initiating discharge and letting them know that they need to discharge. If basically at any point, if we're going to be discharging somebody involuntarily and saying you have to discharge, we are required to issue a 30-day notice. And so a resident may be involuntarily transferred or discharged from a facility after 30 days written notice to the resident's representative. But even with that, we're required to assist them with finding another placement. The only exceptions to that would be, and there's a meeting involved with the family. The long-term care ombudsman gets involved. We have to notify them and send a copy of the notice to them. Exceptions to that notification would be if it's an emergency situation, we have to send them out to the ER because, either they're an imminent threat to themselves or others. Maybe the person is becoming violent or has behaviors, and there's a significant threat. In the case, we would probably be calling 911 and having them removed from the facility and likely going to the hospital. So there are some exceptions to that. So the resident, anybody who receives an involuntary discharge letter, they do have a right to appeal, and that information is on the letter that we give them, is on the notice, and so they can appeal. Now, if they do decide to appeal, we cannot, that may take some time. We cannot discharge them during that appeal process unless maybe the family has changed their mind, or they've decided, they've found another place and they choose to discharge them. That's different, but we can't force them to leave during that time. There also has to be quite a bit of documentation justifying why we can't meet the person's needs, why we've issued the notice for involuntary discharge. The physician, there's documentation required by the physician that would state either because of mental health reasons or behavioral reasons, or either the patient is endangered or they're endangering others, why we wouldn't be able to meet their needs here, why this placement isn't appropriate for them. And the documentation would also need to include the basis for the transfer, why they're being discharged. And a lot of this goes on our skilled rehab discharges too. We have a transfer form that gets filled out, and we have a lot of people that either discharge from here to assisted living or they go home. So these are some things that are required to be on that paperwork. We have to have their contact information, advanced directive information, whether they're DNR or full code, any precautions. Say they come in for a hip fracture and we're discharging them and they may still have some weight-bearing precautions or restrictions. We have to have that included in the discharge packet to either send with them to the assisted living, or the new caregiver needs that, or whether they're going home and a family member would need to have that information. Any upcoming appointments, comprehensive care plan goals that would apply to somebody going to another facility or assisted living or adult foster care. We just need to make sure that, for continuity of care, we're transferring all of that over to them. And all of the residents at the time of discharge will be given a final statement, return of any money, property, or other items held in trust or custody of the facility. So, if they have money in the safe or keeping a wallet in the safe, we make sure that all of that is returned to them at time of discharge. If there's any final billing, that needs to be resolved. And if the facility, another reason why the facility might be issuing a notice is if the facility is closing down. And so the administrator would provide written notification prior to the impending closure to the state survey agency, the ombudsman, and again, we would be working with families and people to get their loved ones placed somewhere else. So when a resident goes to the hospital, is transferred out, even when it's to the ER, and we don't have a lot of, it's not planned, we don't have a lot of time. There is some paperwork that goes with them to the hospital, and then the family is also contacted within 24 hours to let them know what our bed hold policy is. If somebody goes to the hospital, normally, it's expected that they would come back, but if they go to the hospital and they're then requiring one-on-one care, which is something that we don't provide. You know, there may be several reasons why we're not able to take that person back right away. This is, you know, letting the hospital know, letting the patient and the family know this is what our policy is and this is who you can contact. And residents do have a right to pay to hold their bed. If the family wishes to do that, they can pay to hold the bed. If they're thinking they're just going to be at the hospital a few days and we've been really full.
How long will you hold it without charging them?
Usually at least 24 hours, and then kind of figure out what's going on if they're expected to come back. We don't always implement the bed hold, you know, require that they pay to hold the bed if we have other beds open, if we haven't had other inquiries. So Charlene keeps track of that, and then she contacts the family and the hospital discharge planner, and they work that out. And sometimes the family may ask the nurse, call and ask the nurse about that, so then you could just give a message to Charlene then, let them know that she'll be contacting them. So this is what the notice of transfer, involuntary transfer, the 30-day notice form looks like. And this is what we have to submit to the family, the patient, and to the DHS and to the Ombudsman office. So it has information about how they can appeal, what their rights are. This is an example. This is what we use for notifying residents. This is a new regulation that was implemented within the last year or two regarding notifying residents when they're going to be getting a new roommate. We can't just tell them anymore. We have to let them know in writing that they're getting a roommate, and Charlene does this as well. And then room change advance notification. Anytime anybody's going to be changing rooms, this is what we have to have on file. This is what we have to give them, and they sign it. So caring for the cognitively impaired. Residents and clients with cognitive and sensory impairment have unique needs, which all of you know, that affect all areas of their lives: socialization, mobility, independence, and dignity. Effective communication is extremely important for assisting them in maintaining and improving their ability to perform activities of daily living, maintain safety, communicate needs and desires, socialize with others, and maintain dignity. I know for a lot of nursing staff, it becomes a real balancing act when you have somebody who, you know, you're trying to help them be as independent as possible, but maybe they're really confused and, you know, they're not making the best decisions. So you're trying to protect them, but you're trying not to infringe on their freedom and autonomy. You're trying to support them, but you also don't want them just falling and injuring themselves or hurting themselves. So it can be difficult. Care plans. Each resident or client is an individual with unique needs and has a care plan for their specific problem. You should be, if you're a caregiver, you should be familiar with the care plan and its goals and interventions. So we talked about this earlier. A lot of times the CNAs are the ones that are in the resident's room the most, working with them on a regular basis. And so, you know, if you notice that anything isn't correct on the care plan or needs to be changed or updated, you know, let the charge nurse know. And memory problems are frequent in this population. It could be related to Alzheimer's disease or other organic brain damage or after effects of strokes. There's two main kinds of memory problems. Long-term memory, which is being able to recall the long past, is a little more uncommon and does not have a great impact on their daily immediate needs and care. Short-term memory, being unable to recall the recent past, is the most common and has a great impact on their daily needs and care. If they just ate and can't remember they just ate, or they just used the bathroom, can't remember they just used the bathroom, or they're not supposed to be getting up to walk, or they're supposed to ask for help and they can't remember to ask for help, so they try to get up on their own, that can be an issue. So short-term memory problems result in confusion about, they're not oriented to person, place, and time. So they may not be able to remember staff names or faces, family, friend names or faces, name of the current president, location of their room or their bathroom. They may need a lot of orientation, a lot of redirecting from the staff to get to where they need to go, or to remember what activities are going on, when is it time to eat, that sort of thing. They just need a lot of support. They may not know the hour of the day, whether it's day or night. If they're confused and have sundowning, they may get their days and nights confused, sleep a lot during the day, and then be up a lot at night. So it's important we recognize that some memories are more vital for daily functioning than others. Knowing the location or the bathroom is more important for daily functioning than knowing what state that person lives in. Knowing when it is time for a meal is more important than knowing what season or year it is. It's also important to note that some older persons simply don't care what year it is or who the president is, even if there isn't anything wrong with their memory. Which I've come across that in interviewing residents on rehab. They've been in and out of the hospital, they come here, we're kind of managing things for them, and so the days kind of tend to run together a little bit. If they're not a newspaper reader or they don't watch the news on a regular basis on TV, they might not really care what the day of the week is unless it has something to do with a doctor's appointment that's coming up, or they might not really be paying attention to, what the date is, things like that. The level of assistance needed for a resident with a memory problem varies, so knowing the individual's specific care plan is important. Assistance needed may include, prompting, cueing, repetition, reminders, requiring assistance in some direction in specific situations, or consistently requiring low stimulus environment due to distractibility. So there are a lot of people that have dementia that if they're in, if there's a lot of bright, like the fluorescent lights, a lot of noise and people, a lot of activity, that can be overstimulating and cause them to be more confused and become agitated. So we just need to be mindful of that. They may need to be in an area where it's a little bit quieter. They may do better in a quieter place. Assistance may be needed in newer complex situations only. Sometimes people that come here from the hospital or are new admitting here, it's a new building, they're not familiar with it, and they may just be a little more confused or have trouble for the first few days, but then once they settle in, we notice that they start doing a little bit better. So it's just kind of the whole move itself has kind of thrown them off a little bit. So communication interventions, examples, introduce yourself and call the resident by name. Any way that you can incorporate that cueing and keeping them on track throughout the day is helpful. Tell the resident what time and what the day is and the time of day. Explain all procedures and treatments to the resident before you do it. Don't just rush in and start doing things with the resident. Kind of let them know first what you're going to do. Sometimes it helps to break it down into small steps so that they can follow you instead of giving them too much detailed information at once. Allow them time to absorb and respond to the information. Sometimes we have residents here who have receptive aphasia or expressive aphasia, so their ability to respond or their ability to process what you're telling them may be delayed or slowed down. They have the ability to understand, but they may just need a little time to process it. And then, ask them if they understand and make sure that that they do understand what you're saying. Give them reassurance when needed. Repeat information as necessary. Assisting with activities of daily living and examples. Follow the same routine with the resident's care each day as much as you can. Some residents really benefit from having that, that routine, that structure. Offer the resident or client 2 simple choices to reduce the stress of decision making and increase a sense of autonomy. So you're still keeping them involved and letting them make decisions, but maybe just simplify it so they're only choosing between 2 things so they don't become overwhelmed and confused. The more stability there is in the residents' routine in their day, the less confusing it will be. Altering the resident's environment could be providing a calm therapeutic environment and structured routine. Providing a clock or calendar, family photos in their room to help keep them oriented to their family and their life. Avoid changes in the resident's environment as much as possible. So reorientation and validation therapy. So for residents with memory problems, reorientation to the present time and place a lot of times can be ineffective. And sometimes if a resident is really confused and we're constantly redirecting them, that can just cause agitation, and it's like you're constantly pointing out that they can't remember something. So sometimes it's better to just, try to be compassionate, whatever the state of mind the person is in at the time. They might be having a delusion about their car is out in the parking lot, or their daughter or husband is waiting for them somewhere. So you may, want to just validate what they're saying, validate their concern, offer them reassurance, and, instead of saying, well, you don't drive anymore, your car's, you don't drive anymore, you don't have a car here. Maybe just saying, oh, okay, well, I think there was some, we're doing a lot of construction out in the parking lot. For right now, they're not this part of the parking lot is blocked, so we can't, get to your car right now. Let's check on it later. I'll check on that for you later. Or your son said that your car is in the shop. Just some maybe creative fibbing that provides them comfort, but maybe, so they're not so distressed about that. An example, if a confused resident is looking for their mother who is deceased, it's more therapeutic to ask, what do you want me to tell your mother, instead of your mother has been dead for years, Or if the resident thinks they're at work, ask them to describe things they did at their job, and maybe give them little things that they can do, or, try to incorporate that into their activities or their daily routine. Using these interventions can help improve their quality of life. Impaired decision making. Think for a few moments about the last time you had trouble making up your mind about something and how that made you feel. Impaired decision making is very stressful for a resident and can affect every aspect of their daily care. Types of decision making problems include slowness in making decisions, being unable to make a decision, just making poor decisions, becoming agitated, frustrated, or confused when confronted with decisions. Some residents that are confused, you can talk to them and they appear to be okay, but what they do is they try to cover. They don't really know how to answer you, so they'll just blow you off and say, well, I don't want to talk about that right now, or they'll just answer you and say, oh, of course, things like that, and then they kind of get a little agitated and let you know that they're done with that conversation. That can be a way of covering if somebody doesn't know how to answer the question or they're having trouble processing. There's different degrees of decision-making abilities. There's independent, a person who decisions and ability to organize daily routine and thoughts are consistent and reasonable. There's modified independence, where organizes daily routine and makes safe decisions in unfamiliar situations, but exhibits some difficulty in decision making when faced with new tasks or things that they're not familiar with, new situations. There's moderately impaired. That's where they're making poor decisions. They require reminders, cues, and supervision for planning, organizing, and correcting daily routines. And then there's severely impaired, which all of this is on our MDS assessment that we do for the residents, assessments that we're required to do. And this is all part of that. Severely impaired would be never or rarely makes decisions on their own. Some interventions would be offer 2 simple choices. We talked about that. Allow the resident ample time to absorb and respond to the information. Follow the same routine with care every day. Provide a calm and therapeutic environment, and avoid changes in the resident's environment. Sensory and communication impairments. It is very hard to depend on someone else to meet your needs. When a resident has a sensory or communication problem, it's even more difficult. Assisting residents to make their needs known and making sure their needs are met are primary goals for quality of care. For instance, if somebody's really hard of hearing, that's a sensory impairment, or their vision is impaired, it may come across that they're cognitively impaired, but maybe it's just that they're really hard of hearing, and that affects their ability to communicate. So does anybody have any questions? Okay, and then I have Beth wants to